So picking up where we left off in the last tutorial, we measured an outside wall area to the outside edge of that external leaf at 218 meters squared. I'm just going to show you a way to manipulate that measurement without having to start it again. So I'm just going to right click and copy this dimension. So right click the actual dimension, copy dimension group, and I'm going to call it inside face of external leaf. So a slight change there in terms of the measurement. I'm going to bring it into the inside face of that 100mm outside leaf and click OK. So I haven't changed the folder this dimension is in. It's going to be exactly the same because I copied it from the outside wall area. So it's showing there 218 meters squared. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hover over one of the lines and I'm going to drag and drop it by pushing down and holding the left click button and bring it in and releasing that left click. So do the same for each wall. Hover over it, it turns green, pull it down, and there, release. Do the same on the other side and release. And then there's the last side, obviously, because it's square. I'm going to drop it on the inside face. So I've changed that dimension from 218 to 212, and subsequently all the other secondary quantities have changed. Hovering over that dimension, I've got a length of 58.2, a wall area of 157 meters squared. If I check the others, they'll be slightly more because obviously I've reduced that area and subsequently I've reduced all the other dimensions associated with it. That shows a way of adjusting the line dimensions. I'm going to move on now to the GFA, short for gross floor area. And I am going to change, I'm going to measure both the ground floor and first floor gross internal floor areas through the walls, through the stairwells, etc., because that's essentially what the gross internal floor area represents. I'm going to click point mode. So I'm changing from line mode, which is what I use measuring those two dimensions, to point mode. And you can see that now I've got a kind of blue dot that wants to stick to points and lines on the drawing. I can actually turn off that kind of sticky cursor by clicking geometry, and now I can select points or any place in the drawing, but ultimately it's not as accurate because I can't actually get right on that particular point or corner I want it. So I'm just going to turn that back on. It may be useful in some instances, but right now I'm going to turn back on geometry in dimensions. I'm going to start with this corner, and I'm going to click on the inside face of that internal leaf, measuring the gross internal floor area for the first floor, or sorry, for the ground floor. Again, you may need to zoom in a little bit if I want to select a point along that line that isn't actually an intersection as such. So I'm just going to click that. Maybe that I made a mistake there and didn't come down far enough, so I'm going to click backspace. That goes back a step and try and get at least where I think the connection is. Come across to the other corner, zoom in a little bit. I'm going to keep the inside face the blockwork rather than the render or plaster. So essentially I'm getting the internal floor area. Again, I'm going to come down, clicking the inside face. Going in one direction, it could be clockwise or anti-clockwise. It just won't work if you hop around the drawing, but ultimately if you follow the line, it works just fine. It doesn't really matter what direction you're going. So again, let's say I made a mistake like that, I can just backspace, retrace or backtrace essentially the mistake I made and finish that area off. So come back to that first point by clicking back on the point and hit enter. So now I've got an area of 197.46 meters squared. So the reason it's showing there is 197 because it's just below 197.5 and it'll round to the nearest whole number. So essentially there I've got an area for my ground floor measured through the internal walls, and I'm going to do the same for my first floor. In this particular building I've got a void here in terms of double height space to the workshop, and on the first floor I've just essentially got this corner area here. So again, this one's a little bit easier. Using point mode, now you can see I made a mistake there, so I'm going to backspace and adjust that line. Over to the other side, click, and then come back to where I started. Now I did the other direction there, I went anti-clockwise instead of clockwise, and it works just fine. So my gross floor area, in fact it should be gross internal floor area, is 239 meters squared. Click Dimensions tab here beside Dimension Groups, and I'll see my 2 dimensions. So if I just hover out, clicking the first one, 197, it turns blue. Clicking the next one, 41.56, it turns blue. So I'm just going to change the names from 001 and 002 to first floor, and then change 01 to ground floor. Now I don't have to do this, I'm just being a little bit pedantic, but it just kind of labels my measurements. In the other measurements I essentially just had 1 dimension, so it'll just show that 1 dimension, but because I have 2 dimensions here on my drawing or on my sheet, I've got 2 dimensions in there in the Dimensions tab, but I have to click the Dimensions tab to see the breakdown of those dimensions. Now what I'm going to do is just going to show you an opportunity once you've completed a dimension, rather than having to redo it if you've made a mistake. You can actually manipulate that dimension by adding points. Now I can only do this in point mode, I can't do it in line mode. Adding points to one of the lines. So I'm going to just maybe come around this store area here to show you that I can manipulate that dimension. I'm hovering over one of the lines, it turns green, or at least the 2 points on either side of the line turn green. I'm going to add a point. I'm going to hover over, again, I'm going to hover over another line, add a point, and I'm just going to add a few points along that line there. Add a point. So you can see I've added 1, 2, 3 points there. Just going to zoom in a little bit, bring that point down to there. Bring that one into there. May even this one, bring that one into that corner, and I may need to add 1 more. Right click, add point, and then bring that one down. So you can see there I may need to zoom in a little bit more and get the actual corner and the inside face of that blockwork rather than the render, and essentially I've manipulated that dimension to exclude that store area. It gives you an opportunity just to maybe change that dimension after the fact. Again, I can delete points by hovering over the point, it turns green, and then I delete point. I don't delete the dimension, that'll delete the entire dimension. I'm just going to delete the point. Again, right click, delete point, and in fact I don't need that one either. Delete point, and essentially I'm back to where I kind of started. I'll zoom in again, delete point. So I'm back to what my original measurement was. It's just a way of manipulating those dimensions. Moving on from that, I'm just going to check, double click my GFA. Yeah, I have a default height in there as 2.7 meters. That's fine. Just to show you that in 3D, click Drawings, and you can view your dimensions in 3D just to get an indication of the wall area, the ground floor, the perimeter length, what that entails. It's just a kind of a quick way of seeing, I suppose, your dimensions in 3D. I can't measure in 3D as such, but I can just view my dimensions just to see what it looks like with the default height essentially on that area. So I'm going to click back, and I'm going to add another dimension in here. I'm going to click Dimensions tab across the top, add a dimension group like I did in the previous video, and I'm going to add a ground floor area dimension. Keep it in standard, measurement type area, leave the default height. I might just change the color, doesn't really matter what color. I'll keep my negative dimension, that's essentially my positive dimension. I'll keep my negative dimension as red, and I'll click insert. And I'm going to go ahead and measure essentially my ground floor area again, similar to the GFA and the inside face of that internal leaf. So again, if you just be patient while I do this again, maybe a little bit of practice for you guys, no harm. So zoom in, that's about right there. Zoom in again. And I'm just following again along that inside face of that blockwork. No different than what I'd done before. In fact, I could have copied the dimension and deleted the first floor area and it would have been just fine, just changed the name of the dimension. But again, for a little bit of practice, it's no harm in doing it again. So you'll notice I'm kind of zooming in and zooming out as I need to move along the drawing or move around the drawing. Again, if I made a mistake, I would backspace and I suppose correct the mistake I made, and I'm going to come back on to my first point, try and click right back on it and click enter. So again, I have that 197 meters squared, and if need be I can manipulate it if I made a mistake. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to deduct out the area that the ground, or I suppose that the internal walls make on that ground floor. The reason I'm going to do that is because I'm looking for an area that will represent, you know, sand blinding, insulation, hardcore fill, the concrete slab in the floor, and they don't go across because these have their own internal foundations, so they'll butt up against those internal walls. So in the GFA I won't do that because the gross internal floor area is designated as an area that measures through those walls. But when I'm looking for an area I can use, maybe in my substructure element, I do need to deduct out the area of those walls. So again, I'm going to stay in point mode, but I'm going to select negative here in the dimensions tab, and I'm going to try and break down the area of this into maybe a number of sections. I can't necessarily do it as a complete, so I will need to break it down into a number of sections. Click down here, zoom in a little bit just to get that line. So just be patient with me because this will take a little bit of time. And then back on the first measurement. So a slight little angle there. I might just hover over that dimension and bring it down a little bit. You can bring it down to 90 degrees. I may have done the same over here. Again, I'll do the small 100mm walls. Okay, this is my next section. Hopefully this will complete another area for me. And that's returning to the first point. So that's two sections as such. And then maybe my last section here. So starting there. Corner. Corner. Keeping it on the inside face of that blockwork rather than on the render or the plaster. And then my last section, 3 sections in total, back to the first point, click enter. So now you can see there's a reduction in my area from what was 197 now down to 192. I'm going to click both here just to see both my positive and my negative dimensions. When I click the dimensions tab here, I should see my full dimension of 197.45 and then my deducts. So that section is 2.78 meters squared, smaller 0.77 meters squared, and 1.62. Something I didn't show you before, if I feel I want to adjust the dimension, again maybe just the positive dimension here, so I'm just going to select that positive dimension. And I want to maybe retrace or redraw without having to do the entire dimension again. I can hover over one of the lines, select right click once it's selected, and uncomplete area. So basically it'll give me the opportunity to kind of go back through that measurement to the point I maybe made the mistake, and then redraw or re-click on the lines I want to re-click on. Now I've essentially just completed that same dimension again, but you can alternatively change that dimension to correct it in a manner that is more reflectant on what the proper dimension should be if you made a mistake. So again, you right click on a line, hover over a line, right click, uncomplete the area, and essentially redraw that. So it's another way of, I suppose, manipulating that measurement after the fact, rather than having to redo it again. So you can either delete points, add points, or uncomplete the area of that dimension. Now that can only be done in point mode, not necessarily in line mode. You can uncomplete a dimension in line mode, but you can't add points essentially to that line takeoff. Okay, from an educational point of view, in terms of the educational software that Costex provides, one of the most important things, especially in DIT, Dublin Institute of Technology, is that we export our building every time we work on it. So we create a copy of that building. Now that's important because more than likely you could be working on different machines or different desktops in different labs, and the lab computers, or the Costex educational license on each one of the lab computers, can only hold 4 buildings. So if you think that your building is going to be there again the next time you turn up at that particular desktop, it'll probably be deleted because there's plenty classes using Costex. So the best thing for you to do is to export pretty frequently the building and keep a copy. Now don't keep exporting the same name. What I would suggest doing is changing the name of the building every time you work on it. So what I might do is, top left hand corner, I would show building properties, and I may change the name to warehouse, 02.1 or 03, whatever the version I want to create, or maybe even the date. If that is grayed out and you can't change the name of your building, what you need to do is go top left hand corner, Costex options, rename buildings. Make sure that is selected, otherwise you can't rename your building, and then go and do it again. So show building properties and change the name. My last building name, I suppose my first video was Warehouse 01 or Warehouse, so maybe change this to Warehouse 02. Click update, and then you need to essentially export that building. So top left hand corner, export building to EXF, and click select. You should have the name of the file, Warehouse 02, and click save. Just be careful when you are exporting that the name here in the building you're selecting is the same name up here. There is sometimes it may select one of the buildings that is in the system that isn't the one you're working on. The little, I suppose, point to note, because it can then, you select the wrong building and it'll overlay, I suppose it'll save that building and you may have lost your measurement. So just make sure that that's selected as Warehouse 02 and click select, and then click save. In this case you may save to your G drive or your Z drive in Bolton Street. So click save. Click OK, and there's that building saved. So thank you very much. We'll see you in the next tutorial.